Hello, welcome back. It is that time again, Wednesday, 1 p.m., December 9th. It is a beautiful day in Napa today, I tell you what. Today I have a very, very talented winemaking team. Unfortunately, the wife is feeling a touch sick today. I have David Sadie of David and Nadia will be joining us momentarily. So if we can find them in here today, I'm still looking. Got them. I am your host, Anthony, the viewer for Washington State and South Africa. We've got some amazing wines to try today and talk about some great Swartland juice. Hello, sir. How are you doing today?
Good evening, Anthony. Well, thanks to you.
Fantastic. Can't complain. 2020 has been what it is, and I don't want to complain because it could always get worse, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, it's been a challenging year, but
yeah,
we're surviving.
Yeah, for sure. That's why it's always a good thing to have and collect a fair amount of wine, so you can pop in your cellar anytime you need it, and give the glass of wine you deserve. So, thank you so much for joining me today. I know it's kind of hectic times, and it's late where you are. It's 11 p.m. In the Swartland. So, thank you so much. David, for our viewers that may not know who you are, know much about you in the States or elsewhere, can you please give us a quick bio about yourself and a little background about your brand?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It actually started way back from 1757 when the very first Sadie came into the Swartland from Europe. So our family has been here ever since. And basically my wife and I studied together back at University of Stellenbosch. She specialized in viticulture and soil science. I did viticulture and wine. We met, eventually got married, started our own wines, moved back to the Swartland, and at that stage it was quite obvious to move back to the Swartland because the revolution started, which was started by the Badenhorst family wines, by Sadie family, Bosch Leinberg, Melanius. They were doing amazing work basically to pave the way for us forward and lay a good foundation for us young producers to also start our own production, which is what we did. And we established ourselves permanently in the Swartland for the first time in 2014 vintage. So it's been quite recent.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah. So first of all, congratulations on becoming one of the newest members of the Cape Winemakers Guild. I know that was recently posted just a few days ago. So well-deserved. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This year has been crazy to say the least. I mean, South Africa's had it pretty hard for 2020 with government prohibition, and then for a time being a stop on all exports of your alcohol to the rest of the world, which was quickly overturned. But it is what it is. 2020 roll with it. First off, how are you doing this year?
Surviving, and I think for that argument, it's been a relevant year in terms of not being able to travel. We spent amazing time with each and every supporter, with importers, telephone calls, Zoom calls, and we actually got the opportunity to reach out to a broader audience. Sadly, not in person, but over the internet, it works actually amazingly well to be able to do tastings with people from around the globe. So I think it's strengthened our brand, but it's definitely strengthened South Africa's brand as well in terms of the fact that we were prohibited to export, regardless of whether it might be political driven arguments or not. The world showed good support as to actually wanting to drink and support South African wine, and hopefully that sentiment will last a long time. But yeah, it's been favorably for doing a lot of exports. Exchange rate wise, it's been very positive. So it does help a bit for the lack of local sales we had with our trade that closed down from us at the time. It's picking up amazingly well. And worldwide, and also in our own country, we've seen amazing support from private customers that buys, supports, put away in their cellars. So we're quite fortunate. Luckily, a small production, luckily wines that doesn't have like a very short shelf life. These wines can age, and I think they need to age. So it's not that our 2020s needs to be out by March or April. We can have time on them in bottle and ship them as we go on. So I think they actually do benefit from age in bottle.
For sure. I agree with you completely. Like your wines, they're approachable in youth, but they show amazing amazing aging potential, and there's this beautiful mineral tension with your wines that just makes things far more pleasurable with about 7 to 10 years of age, and they're really really delicious. So we've got a few to try. Before we do, you're located in the Swartland, in the part of it. Why was it important for you to work with the old vine and dry farm with bush?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a region I know well from growing up in this area. So I understand the heat, the lack of rainfall, but it's obviously not that I grew up wanting to be a farmer or a winemaker and therefore went to study it. It was actually wanting to play professional rugby that led me to Stellenbosch University,
Nice.
which is a story for another day. But the region, obviously for the revolution and for the momentum that was paved, it actually goes quite way back in terms of the 60s and 70s, where a lot of dryland farm vineyards were planted in our region. Experimental wise, with old Pinotage clones and vineyards were planted in specifically the Paardeberg region. It's a shallow soil, it's a weathered, decomposed soil, but they call it a duplex soil, and that's actually sad that Nadia is not here to really go into the detail of it. But it's able to hold good water, actually. It's not just that it leaches out because it's a poor and loose soil. So dryland farm vineyards actually flourishes in the mountain. Minerality in wine is key for us. Struggling soils are key. We don't make wine for mass production and opting to go for like huge yields and 50 tons a hectare. I mean, we find with 1 up to 4 tons a hectare, it needs to be as concentrated, quality-driven farming approaches as possible. And there we can hopefully have a good product to start with in terms of the making. I think the decisions and the experimentation around irrigation versus not raining a lot versus challenges of disease pressures during growing cycles. For me personally, I take as much variables out and I leave it up to nature because we can't control it. We can do as much as we can in terms of mulching and biological farming. But it's something that showcases fruit in its most honest way, in my opinion. And there's the beautiful balance, and also there's an exposure to sunlight, which is not a closed, dense canopy type of farming. So yes, you might lose a bit of acid from that argument, but we don't farm, and I think we're fortunate to not farm Bordeaux or varieties that are more suited to colder climates or closed canopies, if I can call it that. So it works well to have more Mediterranean varieties that we can work with.
For sure. And I think the Rhone varietals for the Swartland just make a lot of sense, just in context of how they perform in that type of environment. That's great. I learned something new about you. I did not realize, or I didn't know that you were super into and you wanted to be a baller. What position did you play?
Second row. Actually preferred 8th man, but played. I'm 6'8", so I played 6'7". So I played mostly lock or second row, and my dad played amateur back in the days, and my younger brother plays in France professionally, so it's in our family. And it's also a good excuse for me to go and visit him in France and spend a bit of time in Europe, and hopefully next year I'll be able to do so again, and also spend some time in Spain, which is a country I haven't visited at all, and a lot of time I want to spend.
I think the Spanish have it right with the whole siesta. Get up early, get some work done, then have a big lunch, take a nap. Oh man, have some wine, get back, start a little late in the day. Have dinner around 10, and then little bites throughout the night, midnight 1, 2, a bit around 3. It's fine.
No, they've got their priorities set straight, and we need to admire that.
Yeah. I'm 6'1", and I used to play right wing, and
okay.
Yeah. So one day when we meet in person, when we're safe to get around, we could maybe throw the ball around a little bit.
That would be amazing. I'll bring one with.
Sweet, awesome. So let's go ahead and try some wine, because I've got these three beautiful wines staring at me. We're going to start with the first wine. It's the 2017 Chenin Blanc. This is kind of what you're known for as far as the white side of varietals from your house. Why don't you go ahead and introduce this and talk a little bit about it?
Thanks. So we're privileged to farm and work with an amazing variety of different Chenin Blanc vineyards, specifically old vines. We're part of the Old Vine Project that was started by the Rupert Trust, funded by them, and also Rosa Kruger that started this project more than 10 years ago. And so we're privileged to be part of it as well, where the vineyards needs to be 35 years and older. And relatively speaking, obviously around the globe, we've got older vineyards than what we have in our country. We come from a region and a country that cooperatively were never looking after planting vineyards for 50 years. They were planting vineyards to replant every 20, maybe 25 years. So it's actually a fortunate situation is to have these vineyards in the soil, because they actually outlasted the mass production phase or era in our country. So the 17 vintage is a blend of 7 different vineyards that ranges from early 60s planted, mid 70s, early 80s, predominantly granite. I'll be referring to granite a lot, because that remains the most core, most relevant part of our production.
Sure.
So some shale, clay, iron influenced vineyards. It's been a blessing of a vintage on top, or just after 16, which is the next wine. 16, we encountered 2 heat waves during vintage, which makes it a bit of a challenging vintage. 15s and 17s, we had 4 weeks, and which is relatively short in South Africa in terms of vintage. But we had 4 amazing weeks and then a heat wave thereafter. So we were fortunate to pick when we wanted to. Whereas 16, we were almost forced to pick earlier than what we would have wanted to. And therefore, ever since 15, 16 vintages, we've been really focusing on doing multiple pickings. So even for the Chenin we're tasting now, we'll have a vineyard blend of 7 different vineyards, but it will be at least 15, 16 pickings, keeping everything separate, learning from our mistakes, learning the vintage, look at sweet spots from the vintage, from the vineyard. We also make a couple of single vineyard Chenin Blancs, and because we don't correct our wines commercially, we also want to have options available from the same vineyard in terms of different pHs, textures, depth, length, everything that you want. And then you can blend back, even if it's a single vineyard, we blend different pickings back to bottle wine from the vintage that we believe is a true, honest reflection of the vintage. So with our main project, which is the David and Nadia label you've just held up, the most important message is to have and to showcase Swartland wine of origin wines. Obviously, as a country, we're relatively new in terms of quality. Although we've got a beautiful old history, is we need to really establish ourselves amongst the best of the rest of the world. So we can't accept or expect us to stand on a rock and shout out to the world and then to be taken seriously. We as a group of at least 30 producers, at least just for the Swartland argument, and then hopefully. And yes, in the Cape, we all have the collective effort where we shout the Cape's name or South Africa's name or Swartland's name very hard, as opposed to just shouting your own name, because we want people to obviously look at the Cape for the quality that comes from here. And obviously, the conversation around value for money, it's relevant. Sometimes it can be a negative perspective based on South African wines. Yeah. My visit in the States 3 years ago showed me that all that we need in the States, and I'm not saying it's a different country to UK, but historically the UK and European countries, they've got a strong relationship with our country, whereas we need to be tasted in both the East and the West. It's huge, strong own consumption, own traveled, knowledgeable drinkers, and just to have an opportunity or to get opportunities to be tasted. Then I think proof is in the pudding and people will love and buy the wine. So, yeah, that's the most relevant. So, yeah, that's the 17 vintage Chenin.
Yeah. You've said a lot of important things. which I completely agree with. I think what the Swartland Revolution set out to do is to bring awareness of what the overall region is doing in terms of quality, showcase, the top producers of the region as well. The thing that I love about the Swartland is that you always get this beautiful mineral tension with the wines that I find it's very hard to create elsewhere. Other regions do it, but not with the same amount of purity and shine. It gets rather warm in the Swartland, so you have that intensity. So you have this shine of fruit, but also this underlying minerality that kind of cradles the expression. And then with the Chenin Blanc, you have this beautiful mineral texture and this weight that is really, really thoughtful and very food friendly. I think more people were to take a chance to try some of these wines, they would realize how versatile they really are. Like you could sip on this all day, but I guarantee you with food, with like an oily fish, this would be just amazing. Sea bass would be fantastic. I could see like citrus vinaigrette over like arugula and poached pear. That would just be really, really beautiful and delicious.
I've had dinner about 2 hours ago, but I'm hungry again now.
No, I'm sorry. it's bedtime there. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'll definitely make some food now as we
Right.
at midnight. Yeah, I mean, it's a warm region, as you said. We don't have the same pH profile as, or similar to call it Loire-driven Chenins. It's not the same. We do go through malolactic fermentation, not to gain richness, but to make these wines microbial stable as well. And whenever we ferment and sulfur up wines, eventually we make sure they are bone dry, because we can't play with a demi-sec style where we've got 6, 7, 8 grams of sugar lying around. For our perspective, we need to have bone dry wines, and obviously fermenting with a bit of lees for phenolics and tension in the wine. It helps with that, call it salinity, umami effect. When you swallow these wines, the perception of dryness, freshness is important for us, even if we don't have these sky-high acid bottlings, because they aren't. Having said that, one of the single vineyards we bottle, which is called Plakbos, that vineyard from 2013 that we've been farming it, we pick because it's a northwestern focused slope, which is a warm slope in our country. That we pick for beautiful acid. So we get decent acids, and those are probably the most linear, tight, long, almost call it sec in style driven Chenins from granite. And it's an amazing platform. It's a 4-hectare vineyard, and it's an amazing platform for both the Aristarchus and for the Chenin to have a lower pH, beautiful high acid component to blend in, because we need those components if we don't want to commercially correct and just make wine with a lot of additives.
For sure. Yeah, awesome. This is showing really great today. Any last words on the 17 Chenin before we move on to the next?
Sorry, just repeat your question. Sorry, I missed you there.
Said this is a beautiful wine. Any last words on the 2017 Chenin before we move on to the next wine?
Yeah, I think it's obvious in our country when we had our first 100-point wine from Kanonkop, which was 2015. A lot of people actually discredited 2016 for the intensity of the vintage in terms of heat waves. And then came 17 amongst the 15s, and next to it stood up as to be a vintage that actually could show itself at a younger stage, because the 16s took a lot more time to show itself due to a lower pH vintage. And I think the challenge we have in a warm region is that a lot of these wines gain texture, specifically with bush vines and with unirrigated vineyards. Yeah. And 10 years ago, we were actually making our wines much riper in style, up to 15, 14 alcohol white wines. Beautiful, showy, but 10 years down the line, they become actually quite sweet and rich. So we love to taste back 10 years in time, because it's part of our journey. It's an honest journey that we're walking. It's not a commercial brand established and we just need to follow vintage. But we believe that our wines for the last 5 years, 6 years, ever since we've established our own cellar and started farming more vineyards, that our wines are slightly more restrained, and over time they develop beautiful texture and richness in style, which is not always a good thing. But if you have good acidity to back it up, that's also beautiful to empower or to experience in terms of our wines.
Sure. Yeah, I think you've perfectly captured that with the 17 Chenin Blanc. Well done. Awesome.
Thanks.
So let's move on to the 2016 Aristagos. This is a beautiful blend. What is it? Viognier. It's Chenin. It's with touch of Semillon and what? Clare Blanche.
Yeah, so it's Chenin Blanc based, which is the core prerequisite for this wine, is that it needs to be Chenin Blanc based. It needs to be based on old vineyards and then also on granite. So again, back to the granite conversation, but also some Viognier, Claret Blanche, Roussanne, Semillon. The Semillon will be the only component we do some skin contact on, and not for the reason of making a skin contact style, but Semillon loses a lot of acid in our region, and our country historically in the 1800s were planted with 95%, if not more, percent of Semillon. So they used to speak of it as the grape, the wine grape. And it's almost extinct at the moment. So we've seen amazing, up the last 5 or 8 years, a lot of amazing winemakers also making Semillon. Bucharest Club as a property, they've been making Semillon for the last 15, 20 years, if not longer. And it's never a grape in the Cape that's, at least in the warmer regions, bottled with high acids. But it's got a beautiful stability, and it ages amazingly well. So that skin contact is done purely for a bit of extraction on the skin. The juice itself, because it's got a beautiful thick skin, is actually quite neutral. So we prefer to work with a bit of skin contact just to extract flavor and phenolics from the skin. And we also make our Semillons in around 10-11% alcohol. So it's not a big fat rich style. So those goes back to 1960 and 1972 planted. The Claret Blanche will be from the early 80s, also quite neutral in style. Mm-hmm. And then the Chenins from 60s, 70s, and 80s. Viognier, Roussanne and something like Marsland that we've started including in younger vintages of this white blend. Those are young varieties in our country, less than 20 years old in terms of bottling them as single varieties. And we believe in the role that they play for aromatic whites in the Cape. I won't necessarily bottle a single varietal Roussanne or Viognier, although I've worked a vintage in San Josef in the Northern Rhone. Marsland, Roussanne, Viognier, it ages well. Our country is quite warm, so we can be quite oily when we make wines in a warm region. And although we consider it to be a warm area, we also acknowledge the fact that we have a west coast Atlantic Ocean influence in terms of a diurnal day-night shift in temperature. Mm-hmm. So if we can go for a bit of freshness in our wines, longevity-wise, I think it's also important to showcase freshness from a warm region.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree. The one of the many things I like about this wine is that you get it, you taste it, and you're first initially hit with a few different kind of highlights of kind of almost like burnt lemon rest with kind of pineapple husk, a little bit like white peach skin, and then there's that nuttiness that kind of fills the mid palate, and then the weight, and then there's like this subtle spiciness that fills in the gaps that kind of coats the palate. There's amazing texture, there's really good acidity, and it just kind of coats the palate, lays on the palate. Very, very food friendly. It's beautiful. I mean, this is clearly looking at the style. You can tell that there's some vineyard practices that are happening here. That you're trying to keep the grapes as fresh as possible, but also as pure as possible with some of the dry farming techniques. There's that kind of that rich robustness to the core of the fruit, not necessarily to the shine of the fruit. So the weight and texture and the feeling of the mid palate that I find most impressive about this wine.
Thanks. Yeah, and again, going back to the 10 years down the line journey, is that 10 years ago we were doing buttonaging and we were enhancing mid-palate development, which we've stopped doing, and I think our wines got better for that, because we do spend 10, 11, 12 months on the lees. So we do work with natural fermentation. Therefore, we get glycerol, we get texture, we get mid-palate with aging on the lees. So we don't need to enhance it or encourage it really to get it. And then again, back to open canopies and not supplementary water to actually dilute the profile of soil we have or the profile of fruit, to be able to get amazing concentration in our juice is a big privilege. It's not easy personally for myself to work with vineyards that are farmed in terms of supplementary irrigation. I love wines made from it. I don't have any problem with it, but personally for our own journey, as dry as possible, it shows the year, it shows the challenges we have.
Yeah.
And I think there lies a bit of skill in it, not to say that we're skillful, but there lies beautiful skill into showcasing that wine's not as rich and almost overwhelming sweet, and where it's just purely perception, that balance of picking earlier versus too late. So it's been a relatively short time, in a decade, where as an industry and as a region, a lot of us were making our wines big, bold styles 10 years ago. And I think it showed the region well. If you think of Priorat, they didn't get known for a very shy bottling. I mean, some of the Grenaches that comes from there are beautiful, rich in style, and not shy wines from schist.
Yeah.
So we also need to acknowledge that. But the balance of a warm climate, which is quite similar to what they have, and then obviously your own preference as to, are you making wine for the world and for someone to review, versus this is a beautiful and honest reflection. And we've all traveled, so we also need to have our own styles and preferences, whether you are influenced by colder regions for acidity levels, and then try to apply some of those practices. And you can't just duplicate, but to get inspired by acids and pHs, and those are probably the most core relevant things in terms of wine's health and ageability.
Yeah, it's as you said. I agree. I really enjoy wines that show sense of place. So if you dry farm and you literally rely on Mother Nature, the elements, land, the terroir, it captures the essence of everything that's happened to that vine, to that plant, to those grapes in the bottle. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with having the stability of being able to irrigate and a a kind of homogenized like quality bottling year after year after year when you're looking for that continuity. But there's something that is kind of daring and sincere about having dry farmed grapes in the middle of seemingly nowhere, and you have to make beautiful expressions from them, and there's this sincerity that I genuinely enjoy. And I think, I mean, maybe you can shed some light on this. How much tourism do you see in the Swartland, like where you are?
Obviously at the moment nothing, which is we never, it's obviously a blessing getting people at the cellar. It's been a year that no traveling, and almost we've done probably 2 tastings after vintage, which is that we've only started doing tastings again. So we've seen local tourism picking up again. But if you look at South Africa's history, the Constantia, the Stellenbosch, and Franschhoek, historically it's just purely a no-brainer to go and visit them and to taste the wines from there, because it's although it's just an hour north from Constantia, it's not as tourism friendly, we are working on that.
Yeah.
We don't have that same quality of food in our region in terms of gastronomy and local restaurants. There are amazing private chefs, small guest house chefs, people that's traveled. We've got Wolfgat, which is an amazing restaurant, and Paternoster. The skills are next level. So the gastronomy in Cape Town is always, and Stellenbosch and Franschhoek, is of such a level that people will not only go for good wine, but also for the food part of it.
For sure.
The last 2 years, the Swartland Wine Route, which is the bigger collective, which we are a member of, they've really invested in tourism-driven marketing. So to get people out to our region, we've got beautiful olive oils in our region, some good tourism, guest houses, beautiful farms. Baardenhorst family wines are opposite of us in the Paardenberg. And over there, you can do a 50th beautiful lunch with 20 or 50 people, and they've got a chef and a family that looks after you, and they've got beautiful aperitifs. And so slowly but surely, we see these very, very authentic, curated tourism experiences happening. And it's also something that the Swartland Revolution started was we realized as an industry or as a region that we can't duplicate ourselves elsewhere. The authenticity of the region lies within the region. So people need to come and visit us. Luckily, and I'm saying it with respect, we don't base our business on cellar door sales.
Of course.
I'm fortunate to be able to sell locally in South Africa to an amazing group of private customers that we've been working and building up for the last 10 years. So we can ship to them directly within 24 hours or 36 hours. So in these times, that's what happened. Conversations, emails, releases, allocations, and then we could ship the wines immediately. And obviously, next year will be a good year to look back at the 2020 vintage or the 2020 year. In terms of the relevance of travel, I think when you travel, it needs to be quality time, both locally or internationally. Because traveling and obviously time is important for all of us, so we don't need to waste one another's time. So I think when you travel, make sure it's a well planned, because everything is expensive, specifically if you earn rand. So it's important to plan well and make sure that it's an efficient trip. And then obviously you need to visit good producers and walk the vineyards with them and spend time in that, because it's so philosophical and it's also inspirational and personal when you are able to visit amazing producers that inspires you.
For sure. Yeah, I remember my trek up to the Swartland last year, and the drive from Stellenbosch into the Swartland reminded me of driving through parts of Arizona where I'm originally from, where you kind of drive and there's large stretches of land that just, it's road and scenery. It's like mountains and bushes and trees, and there's not too much going on. But then you get to where you're going, you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. The one thing I think that could benefit the Swartland is having, some boutique hotels, at the base of a mountain, very private, boutique hotels where, people can sit there and enjoy what the Swartland has to offer. I think something like Sedona, with that, like outside of, the beautiful scenery, like why are people going to Sedona? It's like because they want to be in the element. I even though it is only about an hour, away from from Constantia or Stellenbosch, there, once you get there, it's stunningly beautiful, and it does feel different from the rest of Constantia, Belgium, and Stellenbosch and Franschhoek. You almost feel removed, but from the area. But then you realize what's happening there, and I think you have a greater appreciation for what's happening, because these vines are struggling a little bit, and then they finally hit the groundwater. The only other place that I've seen and had that same feeling was in Jumilla in Spain, where you drive and drive and drive, and to get there you have to go off the main highway onto a dirt road, and then you're in the middle of nowhere. But you see these awesome, gnarly old bush vines that are like 60, 70 years old, producing amazing fruit, and no one seems to really know about it. And then you sit there and you say, this is a steal. How come more people don't know about this? And I think both places which dry farm in very hot regions, surrounded by beautiful, dry, mountainous areas, could benefit from a few boutique hotels that would bring people in, and then you could tap into the Swartland wine trail with that as well. Yeah. I've
Definitely,
got a
our
lot of
region is
different
known.
ideas. Go
No,
ahead.
it's amazing proposals. Our region is known for grains, and it's a bread basket of our country.
For sure.
It's probably the biggest, well, maybe second biggest wine of origin region in our country. But it's so underdeveloped in terms of vineyards. So a lot of young, and I'm being one of them, but young producers and some mates of ours, they also plant amazing new sites, new vineyards further north in the Swartland, where they are able to get amazing altitudes of 600 to 800 meters. Obviously, I'll get shot for advocating only dryland farm vineyards, but when you've got very well drained soils and you know how to irrigate, then you can make as amazingly well wines. So I'm not shouting the one or the other. For me personally, what we try to work with is the dryland focused. The boutique hotels, the authentic experiences. I mean, those are all so relative in terms of what we need as a region. We've got a few of those, and obviously when you come next year, we'll need to go and explore them. As an example, we take our kids in a caravan and go and stand next to the sea for 1 week, and you're off the grid in terms of water and everything, and seafood, local cuisine, salinity in food. It's an amazing privilege to stand there and just appreciate nature, and it costs you barely nothing. So we've got a lot to offer, but again, it's that road less traveled, which is also in a good way. It needs to almost stay like that. We don't need to overpopulate the tourism part of it, but yeah, beautiful area.
For sure. Yeah. Someone just said like, yeah, don't spoil it. No boutique hotels. Yeah, which I agree with, but at the same time, I think it would definitely help with the region overall. So
Definitely. I mean, we've seen amazing producers from Constantia, Stellenbosch, and even in the region that they call Brede Kloof. It's a mass production region historically. They started with a group that calls themselves the Brede Kloof Makers. And I think there are 14, 15 producers that came together and decided that they want to champion Chenin Blanc.
nice.
And all of a sudden, a lot more people shows interest, and there's actually quality that comes from there. So yeah, it's a good region to grow up in terms of wine as well for the Swartland. But we've also seen amazing second and a new wave in our country across the board in each and every region. So it's been very positive.
Awesome. Any last words about the Aristagos before we move on to the Elpidios?
Yeah, so the name is a relevant name for us, and it joins the Elpidios as well in terms of having two Greek names, and we're not Greek, they are just beautiful names. And probably if and I'm not saying we, had the discipline, we would have only made two wines, and it would have been a white blend and a red blend. So blends are basically what made our region famous in the last 10 years. Yeah. And they resemble not only multiple varieties, but it also resembles multiple soils. So going back to the Swartland independent producers, which we are a member of, is that we obviously have a conscious decision that we made as to not to commercially correct each and every vineyard that we bring in. Try to rather farm it better, which is not easy, but rather have components, have different soil types, have different varieties that you can blend together. So the Aristarchus would be probably 14 vineyards and about 20 or 22 pickings. So a lot of detail that we are able to keep separate for a long year. And the name means the best way of leading is by serving others. So for us, it's a humble position we take in terms of it's not about ourselves, definitely not. We want to celebrate our region, our people, and obviously our country, and rather serve others. And whether it is purely serving a glass of wine, but just serving others in terms of the humbleness around it, as as a little leader in our own company, which we are able and privileged enough to employ a few people and keep them in terms of food on their table in our region. And that joins the name Elpidios, which is it means to have hope and to also create hope and to have an expectation for the future. So it's important in our country, and I would like to say it's probably after this year important in each and every country around the world. But it's relevant in the Paardeberg, where you see poverty, you see more than 3 generations living in the same house, and we can do our little bit by employing some of them, by walking the walk with them. So that's the now and the hope of the future.
With the 2015 videos, just from the nose, you get the sense that there's that beautiful aromatic lift that happens with whole cluster, and from warmer regions like that, I think that's one of the smartest things that a producer can do. I see a lot of this happening in Walla Walla, Washington, where producers are taking their own varietals and adding, and running through anywhere between 30 and 80% whole cluster. 50% just has that kind of nice lift that takes that generous fruit and then just pushes and elevates it up. And you get that beautiful, floral, elegant lift from whole cluster with this. It's beautiful. This is a blend of Carignan, Syrah, Pinotage, and Grenache. Is typically a Grenache. You're known for Grenache for the red varietals.
Yeah, so it's an interesting journey. The Elpidios started out as being Syrah led, and when we maybe backtracking a little bit, working for Waterford Wines, Rustenburg Wines, Saronsberg, Northern Rhone, it's been Syrah, and Syrah. So, and obviously when we looked at what's going on in the Swartland, it was definitely also Shiraz or Syrah as being the main red focused variety, which today still is relevant. That is the most successful variety in our region. So we started in 2011 with our very first blend, was Syrah led, up all the way to 14, and then we realized that it doesn't have to be Syrah. It needs to be, in our opinion, with the intense vintages we've had, a Mediterranean variety in terms of either Cinsault, Carignan, or Grenache. And 15 and 16 vintage of the Elpidios, we bottled Carignan led, and then 17 we were able to make the blend a Grenache led blend. So from 17 onwards, the Elpidios will be Grenache led, standing amongst and alongside the main Grenache bottling. And I mean, even for Carignan as an example, it's proven itself to be a variety that's so suited to dry, intense conditions. In our region, the bigger berry varieties and being more Cinsault and Grenache, they are spoken of as the farmer's grape. So for cooperatively, it's a no-brainer to farm varieties that are big berried in size, and that gives amazing yields. And specifically, if you can farm for tonnage, and if you need to earn a wage or living based on weight, then those are amazing varieties. But sadly, Grenache followed the footsteps, and Carignan in a way as well. It followed the footsteps of most Grenache plantings around Australia and California, America, in terms of historic bad reputations around Grenache, not dry bottlings, jug wines of past, and then uprooting schemes. In our country, what happened, the KWV that started more than 100 years ago, it led to some farmers up in the north in Pietermaritzburg that basically uprooted the vineyards, and it was predominantly Grenache vineyards planted in that area, because they said they're not going to be controlled by the KWV. They would rather farm tea or rooibos tea as opposed to farming vineyards. So our country, sadly, due to political reasons, lost a lot of amazing vineyards. But it's definitely making a comeback. as a variety planted. So 15, we spoke about it earlier. It's been in and out, 4 weeks, intense, picking every day for 4 consecutive weeks. No hassles. Yeah, so it was a privilege to have a vintage like that. A lot of the older generation producers, they mentioned and said that the 6th or the 15 vintage was probably one of a decade, if not one of a century, in terms of a vintage that came along, and it was intense but beautiful. No hiccups, no rain during vintage, no heat waves at midnight where you have 30 or 35 degrees at midnight that can't cool down. So we're happy with this wine. At this age and stage, we were still making our videos without any concrete influence. So in 2018, we started with a little bit of concrete matured Syrah. Nice. That adds a bit of energy and depth in the wine.
For sure.
Definitely. And coming back to the whole bunch, whole berry question, we're not, or not question, but statement is that I'm not a purist in terms of carbonic style. I believe in part of it. I believe in a balance of stem versus that whole berries. The opulence you get from whole berry fermentation, carbonic fermentation, that's something we adore. Some varieties are more suited to that than others. So with Pinotage as an example, we do a lot of carbonic but without stems, because Pinotage got a very, very thick skin. Yeah. So the tannin is quite grainy and more dry perceived tannins. So if you add stems to that, you can dry out the palate completely. Yeah. But that's also the reason why Pinotage has got 2 beautiful mixed identities, and I'm saying it with a beautiful amount of respect as well. Is that Pinotage, in our country, again, huge respect. It's made by one generation Cabernet makers, people that are able to work with new oak and extraction in a good way, not dismissing the style. But Pinotage followed that, in my opinion, that Cabernet style where these are structured, beautiful wines meant for 20, 30 years down the line. Yeah. Whether it's to your liking or not, that's a very successful style, and that's the style that dominates our country. And then there's a young generation of producers that feels that, yes, one parent is Cinsault and the other is Pinot. And we look at those parents and we feel that, yes, if you just taste those wines, then Pinotage should be in the middle. So I think it lies in the middle, and obviously it leans itself to 2 different interpretations. For me, around 12.5, maybe 13% of Pinotage of alcohol. Old oak, gentle but long extraction, as opposed to very quick and a lot of extractions. That's our own preference of style for Pinotage, which is something we keep on the skins for about 3 weeks, as opposed to 4 or 5 weeks like we do with the other varieties. So the lighter pigment varieties such as Cinsault and Grenache, we can push them a bit longer on the skins, so they can go up to 5 weeks. Depends on the vintage and the pH levels. But yeah, it's a Mediterranean blend based on Carignan with a bit of Pinotage influence. So that Cape influence is also something we see in the Aristarchus, which is the Semillon. Although it sounds controversial, it's a Cape influence in terms of the style we make it down here. So it's and obviously Chenin Blanc as well. But it's a beautiful variety to work with. It's not easy because it's got a high pH similar to Cinsault. So spoilage-wise, it's a big challenge. You need to really be careful for that and be on top of it. So we've obviously made our mistakes. That's why I contest to the fact that it's not an easy variety. But yeah, Cinsault is the same. It's not an easy variety to work with purely out of a hygiene viewpoint.
For sure. Yeah, I think you've nailed this expression for everything you're doing with it, but I can see what the wine will give when it's more Grenache based, and I think you're on the right track with that. I completely agree with what you said about Pinotage, where they seemingly have 2 styles. It's like the massive, glossy, oaked, generous style that's going to please the Cabernet drinkers, but there's also styles out there that are more Pinot Noir-esque driven, and they're lighter with mineral tension and good acidity.
Yeah.
And I think right now, I think ultimately what has to happen if you are making a pinotage, you need to define what the profile and the identity of pinotage truly is. Is it big, massive, and glossy with lots of, or is it, feminine and floral with good acidity and lots of minerality? It's like, yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
I do think overall one day that Sun So will overall be a serious category. I know right now it's not, and I know there's really no category for Sun So really on the planet. But I do think that Sun So is gaining more importance in South Africa, and it has a true unique identity that is pleasing to a lot of people who enjoy Grenache and Pinot
Yes.
and things like that. But yeah.
No, historically, it's been seen as the workhorse of grapes. I mean, Carignan historically in the southern of France, Grenache, it's all been one way or another been seen as a mass production. It's a sweet and cheerful wine, and there's a story based on true facts back in I think in the 1960s, where our industry, the Wine and Spirit Board, at that stage were tasting wines blind, and then they would give the wine a rating, and it would be called superior if superior. So if you look at the old labels in our country, then you can get wines from the same cellar, from the same vintage, and different bottlings, because they never, basically I think somewhere in the 70s, the wine of origin scheme came in where they said a variety to be called a variety needs to be 85%. But before that, if they label it as a Cabernet on the label, you can do actually what you want in terms of adding sensor to it as much as you want and still call it Cabernet. Yeah. And I think the reason why they did it is that they never wanted to reveal the identity of Cinsault because it's not been seen as good. So in the 60s, what happened, they called a specific red wine a superior wine, and then they revealed the variety, and it was Cinsault.
Yeah.
So that started the challenge of how people judge with preconceived ideas around the variety.
Yeah.
And sadly, it's been always on the back pedal. So the last 5 or 8 years, we've seen an amazing turnaround in Pinotage and Cinsault producers. And I think Cinsault actually takes the lead for call it the lighter styles.
I would completely agree. I think Cinsault one day will overtake Pinotage as a whole, as a brand. Ultimately, in 10, 15 years, Cinsault will probably end up selling more units over Pinotage. But that's the thing is, I think there, as you said, there's too many people right now that think that Cinsault is a simple picnic wine, which clearly it has been demonstrated that it is not. That many Stellenbosch producers back in the 60s, 70s added a lot of Cinsault to their wine bottlings, and it aged incredibly well. And I think Cinsault, I think South Africa could make a ploy for regionality of Cinsault and actually claim it as their own, as its true identity, like where it comes from. Because France, it's been growing for quite some time, but I think overall, I think there's far more marketability with Cinsault. But we're getting off topic, and we're almost out of time. So I could talk to you forever. You're super cool, and I'm dead serious. When we meet in person, we're gonna throw around the ball a little bit. We're gonna we'll shoot the wind.
That sounds like a good date.
So where do you ultimately see your brand in 20 years?
I think I'm an impatient person, so I would almost like to narrow it down to 5 years. But let's say the next 20 years, it's important for us to establish our own, or to buy our own farm. At the moment, we farm about 60% of what we work with, but we don't own the land, we lease. So this will be the ultimate 5 up to 20-year dream, is to invest in property, in a good farm, where we've got hopefully existing vineyards that we at the moment work with and can plant more. And then also on that same property is to have a good cellar. So I think those will be core non-negotiable things we want to put in place. And we at the moment in a consolidation phase. So we've had a few odds and ends labels historically, which we bottled for very ambitious and very good reasons in terms of cash flow. But the reality for a very small brand that we are, which is what we are, is that it actually cannibalizes our own production. Because when we bottle our cheap bottlings or sell it as such, those wines were never made for that specific segment. It was made for the premium wines, and then stylistically, volume wise, something didn't work, and then I bottled it separately. And previously we had it under our labels, which actually didn't work well. Again, the attention was amazing. So that's something that we're sorting out, the consolidation, making sure whatever we put into the market is the best bottling and most honest reflection of what we can do. And then on the red side, I would like to add single vineyard Grenache, red Grenache bottlings. So we've already got 3 on the white side, and hopefully 1 or 2, if not maybe 3 in total. But to have maybe 10 wines long term, which is a lot, but everything is based on Chenin Blanc and Grenache Noir. And again, going back to our region's intellectual property, or the good mileage we got from blends, call it appellational wines, call it regional wines, that remains the most core part of this conversation in terms of why we all do shout out Swartland very loud, because we also need to draw attention to one region. And then within that region comes the Cru and the Cloa and the beautiful identification of certain sites where we are able to bottle that separately. Which is something we've done as of 2014, when we started releasing Chenin single vineyard. So, yeah, that will be the next 20 years. And with having 2 boys, and they're 5 and 7 years of age, obviously, if they want to study and learn and train into farming and making, it will be a big blessing if they want to take over. But they also need to lead their own lives and make their own decisions. And we can only do and expose them as much as possible to amazing food and wine, and travel to also get inspired by something that stood the test of time in terms of good, fine wines through wars, through COVID, through everything. We're fortunate, and again, not stepping on toes, but we're fortunate for not making commercial supermarket wines, because I think it's a major challenge, to be honest. Is that
life is about choices. Do you want to make wine for, the public that you can make a lot of money, or do you want to make wine for you that art, expression of art and expression of Mother Nature? So, yeah, I think what you're doing is really sincere, and I see the purity in your wines, and they're beautiful. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, and then maybe quickly to add on something of farming is at the moment, we're about 60-70% of what we work with, we soil-wise farm biological. So basically biological farming is called, or is referring to an investment in soil health, restoring it actually. So compost, a lot of mulching, a lot of different species of cover crops, different depths, different reason as to why we plant cover crops, nitrogen binders, organic material, crawlers. And I mean, we almost there where we can move away from herbicides. It's not easy. We've moved away from all pesticides. That was a much easier thing to do. And then we started in 2016, 17 actually, with about 2 hectares in Rebecca Steel, which is a schist-driven area where the Melanies are based. We're farming that vineyard organically. And then on Paardenbosch, which is the farm we lease, we've got about almost 2 hectares that we also started this year to farm organically in terms of spraying. So we're not doing it for initially certification. We also quantifying what we're doing in terms of the impact. And then we'll review it in a year's time in terms of how successful we were able to farm it, because we also have neighboring farms that's high density in certain areas. So you can't ignore the impact of neighboring farms on your own ambition and dream. So it's a conservative approach, but we're pushing slowly but surely, and Nadia's leading and running up that program where the type of measurements we do once a week on leaves during ripening to see the impact of both biological farming but also on organic sprays or of organic sprays on what we do. So I think it'll be part of the 5 to 20 year dream is to make sure that each and every vineyard we work with is farmed on an amazing platform and scale.
I love your vision. I love your energy. You do it right, man. It's awesome. Awesome. So we're just about out of time. Instagram loves to kick us off about an hour or so. So before we go, do you have any last words or parting thoughts for us?
Sorry, just repeat your question.
Do you have any last words or parting thoughts for us today?
Yeah, I'm not a good marketer, so it's good. It's sad those quotes in the moment, and I'm not a beggar either. We obviously it's important for us to spend time in America, but yeah, obviously as a country we need good sales. But again, I'm a terrible marketer. I think just that proof is in the pudding in terms of getting an opportunity to taste good South African wine, regardless of whether you prefer one region or the other. I think it's an amazing country upcoming, both on this, call it established brands, but also young and upcoming brands. It's yeah, and obviously come and visit. It's cheap. It's very cheap. So that will be my last words. It's just come and visit us when COVID allows you to come in.
For sure.
Yeah.
These are the first of the wines sent to me in the States from Skurnik. So I look forward to the rest of your lineup coming as soon as it lands here in the States. So until then, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I know it's incredibly late. It's now past midnight where you are. I'll let you go to bed. Please send Nadia our wishes to get well and feel better. I'm sorry she's not feeling well tonight. Until then, stay safe, drink well, and be kind to others.
Thanks a lot, Anthony, and thank you. Appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure, brother. We'll see you soon. Cheers.
Bye-bye.